Check this video out. Migrant got stabbed at a shelter. Just stabbing action. Brutal. Just look at all the resources being used that didn't need to be, because you got a bunch of criminals in the country. First aid responders, police, fire. Look at that. How many cops do you have there? New Yorkers. You're footing that bill. How's that feel to be footing that bill? Yeah, that story is migrant stabbed in the neck during a fight in New York City shelter. Suspected attacker is in custody. Not for long he's not. Not for long he's not, because that's not what we're doing. There are over 58,000 illegal migrants who are convicted felons or facing criminal charges roaming New York City at 58,000. 58,000. I know New York City is a big metropolitan area, millions and millions of people, but 58,000 and close to 670,000 across the country. Startling new data obtained by the Post shows. Now, those were some stats that came out. You got 670,000 or 662,000 illegals that have some kind of criminal history. You've got 435,000 that are basically convicted felons. And then you've got another 250,000, 225,000 or something like that, some crazy number like that have charges pending in either their country of origin or the United States. You got over 1 million people that have some kind of criminal activity going on. 1 million people. 1 million. Absolutely wacky. So of the 759,218 illegal border crossers living in the Big Apple, the feds were aware of, as of November 17th, a jaw-dropping 58,626, 7.7% of the population, illegal population, were either previously convicted of crimes or had criminal charges pending. This is according to ICE data. This is ICE's internal data. Yeah. Got a bunch of criminals in the country. They're just running around willy-nilly, doing their thing, like we just saw in that video. And of the 58,000 with rap sheets, 1,053, nearly 2%, are suspected or known gang members. I mean, you let them in. Now you're going to have to deal with it. This is the story that's going to keep on giving, because these folks, they're not going to leave quietly. They're in the land of the free, the land of the brave, the land of opportunity. They have made it here. They're probably going to get deported a bunch of times, but they're going to come right back in. Well, is all that going to stop with Trump and what he's doing? They're going after the criminals. That is his primary emphasis. Now, I know the Democrats want to say, we're tearing families apart. That's always been the big, thing that they look at. But that's not what that's not what we've been talking about since Trump won the election. What's been spoken about and what Honan has said time and time and time again is they're going to start off with going after the criminals that shouldn't be here in the first place, or criminals who've proven they shouldn't be here in the first place by their activities, whether pending or convicted or whatever it is. Get those folks out. But, it's so much easier said than done, right? You don't have enough law enforcement in the United States to handle all this. You just flat don't. So what's going to happen is they're going to do the best they can. ICE is going to do the best they can. Individual law enforcement do the best they can. And that's what'll happen. This mass deportation, I don't think it's possible. It's certainly not possible in the terms that CNN and MSNBC are talking about. They're just, they're talking about this, switch that gets flipped. And it doesn't happen like that. It's not going to happen like that. I mean, even with whatever federal resources we have, the National Guard, The deportation of millions and millions of people isn't going to happen. But if you took out, say, 500,000 of the criminals, that'd be a good start, wouldn't it? And I think that is what this is going to look like. Representative Nicole Malliotakis, Republican from Staten Island, Brooklyn, pointed blame for the stunning stats as soft on crime and lax border control policies pushed by President Biden and other Democrats. Yeah, clearly. I mean, this is also the gift that keeps on giving, right? Genie's out of the bottle. You can't just throw him back in. Hey guys, got to go back to Venezuela. Not happening. It's shocking that Democrats have gone so far out of their way to harbor gang members, drug traffickers, and other criminals who are in our country illegal, said Malliotakis, the lone Republican representing the left-leaning Big Apple. Man, that sounds like a conservative podcaster in Seattle, doesn't it? I mean, just about as ridiculous. You know, a Republican in New York? Yeah. Now we're hearing about a lot more Republicans kind of popping their head up because you're able to pop your head up in today's media and say, hey, I'm a Republican, and not just, have the fallout just start to, hit at you one way or the other. In many cases, they've provided them with housing, food, healthcare when they get stabbed by another criminal. They need to stop using New Yorkers' hard-earned tax dollars to shield criminals wreaking havoc on our streets and instead cooperate with ICE to have them deported. But there's this enormous push, isn't there, where the governors of these states are saying, we're not going to help out. What? Why aren't you? You're not going to help. What they're claiming is they are not going to help deportation efforts. Well, if you're not helping deport criminals out of your state, what are you doing? So California, all these other nut job, far left-leaning states, their leaders are going to say, we're not going to help out. We're not turning anybody over. Well, if you're not willing to turn over criminals, I don't know what good you are. You know what I mean? I mean, this makes absolutely no sense. So these Democrat, leaders standing up and saying this, good luck with that. Good luck with that. We'll see how that goes, right? Malliotakis also said she's been trying to get the similar data from the New York Police Department since the beginning of the year through a Freedom of Information law request, but they keep stonewalling. They keep stonewalling. That's weird. Why would they do that? Well, because the numbers are so bad, they don't want to get them. They don't want to have them released. Not that difficult, right? Not that tricky. Yeah, let's keep a lid on that because those numbers are not good. You know what the general public does? They just kind of go, wow, that's a lot of criminals. And they kind of leave it at that, right? And if they're a Democrat, they're like, wow, just trying to help some people. They're just trying to help, the nice families coming in. Well, and when you let in 20 million people, I mean, that's the number I'm going with now. I'm just going to throw that out there. Maybe it's 10 million, maybe it's 15, maybe it's 20. But when you let in, somewhere between 10 and 20 million people, a certain percentage are not only going to be gang members, but convicted felons. And that's literally what we're talking about, right? Nationwide, the numbers are just as galling. Yeah. Of the nearly 7.8 million illegal immigrants in the United States, 662 or 8.6% are convicted criminals or have charges pending, according to ICE. It's unclear how many are suspected gang members. Kenneth Ganalo, who heads ICE's New York City office, told the Post last week that he's hoping to get additional resources to weed out criminal migrants. You would hope so, but this should be happening as criminals get arrested, as these guys get arrested. And so many of them have been arrested over and over and over, not only at the border, but for other crimes that they're doing while they're here. And they're not getting deported because they're doing these illegal activities in big sanctuary cities. That is the downfall. We don't have as much of that activity going on up here in Seattle because we're too far away from the southern border. So we've got more action from the northern border. We literally, northern portion of Washington sits on the Canadian border. They're cracking down on that as well, but just not nearly as many folks come up to Seattle because it hasn't been a hotbed of, activity of, people wanting to come here and establish their communities. They've gone to Denver, they've gone to Chicago, they've gone to New York, they've gone to DC, they've gone, other places that are geographically, I think, a little bit easier to get to. And California takes a massive, portion of the West Coast because they're on the southern border. Last week, he estimated the number of migrant criminals to be in the thousands in the Post's exclusive front page story, while saying he's frustrated over how New York's sanctuary laws have prevented many of them from being rounded up and deported under his watch. So I think sanctuary cities that don't allow ICE to interact and deport with their police departments, I think they should lose federal funding. I really do. I think they should lose federal funding, not for the police. This isn't the police's fault. This is a public safety issue because of the political affiliation with this whole sanctuary city deal, which is just really misguided compassion. Oh, we feel so bad for these people. How about feeling bad for your own people who are having all this criminal activity done to them, and their taxpayers' dollars are paying to have it cleaned up. And now you've got taxpayers' dollars going to this dude who's getting stabbed at the illegal shelter. I mean, it's just this chain of events that's never ending, right? And you got to cut it off somewhere. And that's where I think with Trump's new borders are, I think he's actually going to do something. I think he will actually enact a lot of policies that they're not going to work overnight. You're not going to get rid of all these people overnight. You're not going to have mass deportations like people are flipped out about. Just the mechanics of those are not going to happen, but it's going to start, and some will happen. And that will be better than nothing. And I think that's what we'll focus on. If you're enjoying this content, I know you're going to want to see more. What do we got going on in our members only content? We've got baby born from prison love. Inmates plan makes history. Got 2 inmates in a prison. They never physically met. They're having a baby. How does that work? You need to find out. How do you do that? Well, you can join for 14 days for free. After that, it's $3.99 a month. They're $40 a year, even cheaper. You're going to want to check out that news story. I know you do. All right. Thanks in advance. I just got back from Oklahoma City, and they're not close to the border, but they have that impact, right? So one of the big stories was that 2-year-old child that came across the border with just a piece of paper. She's trying to get reconnected to her parents, and her mom had sent her with a coyote. And then the coyote handed her off to somebody else at about the border. So, I mean, a 2-year-old girl. I mean, there's another story of a 4-year-old. Can you imagine, sending your kid off because things are so bad at home? All right, I'm going to trust this illegal coyote, member of some, Mexican mafia drug gang. I'm going to trust my 2-year-old daughter to make it across the border. Absolutely mind-blowing. Last week, he estimated the number of migrant criminals to be in the thousands, while saying he's frustrated over how New York's sanctuary laws have prevented many of them from being rounded up and deported under his watch. Yeah, you've got that huge back and forth where, constituents and leadership is like, no, we're a sanctuary city. And yet they don't understand. They're just literally taking out the handgun and pointing it at their foot and just pulling the trigger. Good Lord. Now we got a bunch of criminals causing a bunch of criminal activity. How did this happen? How did we get 1,000 of these folks, that are known gang members, a couple thousand that are known gang members into our city, into our beloved city? Well, because you let a bunch of illegal criminals in. In New York City, it would take a lifetime to clear the city of the criminals that we have. The status quo remains the same, said Gianalo on his first interview since Republican Trump was elected. More than 223,000 migrants alone have poured into the Big Apple since the immigration crisis began in the spring of 2022. And at least 58,000 are still being cared for by taxpayers in city-funded shelters. You're reading about shelters being closed down in Denver, shelters being closed down in Chicago, they're winding these down because all of the political ramification of being a sanctuary city, that has gone out the window. And now it's a matter of paying bills. And let's go Brandon Johnson in Chicago, who's trying to work through how he's going to, come up with a budget. He's going to try and throw out a $300 million tax increase to the residents. And they said, no. 50-something council members said no. What was that? Was it 50? It's like 57 or 55 to 0. They basically said no. So all this virtue signaling, that's gone by the wayside, right? Because now you no longer have that as a pawn in the presidential election. Democrats got absolutely smoked. They got destroyed. Now they're going to have to come up with ways to balance their budgets. And one of the things that they're still holding on to is that, no, we won't have our, police working with ICE deporting these poor people with children. Well, that's not really the story. That's not really what we're doing here. And that's not what we'll see moving forward. Now, maybe initially, they just go after the criminals. I think that's, and anybody else who doesn't belong here, who hasn't, has had their initial immigration status hearing and they don't qualify. All those folks got to go. They just got to go. Because taxpayers' dollars are finite and we can't solve the entire world's problems. We just can't. It's a hard no-go. So I think what's being made out in the media is wildly overblown. And I think what the Republicans are doing is they're basically saying, hey, yeah, this is who we're focusing on, but nobody believes them because they just think, they're going to separate everybody from their babies. Well, how about that 2-year-old girl who got sent across the border by a coyote? Yeah, how about her? What about her? I mean, and the numerous women that are being trafficked because Tren de Aragua, that's what they do. They deal in human trafficking and sex trafficking. So, how's that working out for all those Venezuelan young ladies coming across the border? They have these big debts and they're told, hey, here's a quick way to, work that off, literally. What does any criminal do? They run away to someplace else. Democratic Party, top to bottom, is responsible for every single one of these criminals and should be financially responsible to compensate crime victims, he said. Agreed, but that's never going to happen. That's never going to happen. And as this was happening in real life, everybody on the right said, what are you doing? What are you doing? And it just mum was the word, right, from Democrats. Oh, we're compassionate. Well, how's that working out for you? How many criminals you got in the country now? How many criminals you got? Oh, yeah. How badly did you lose the 2024 election? Because literally your candidate was the border czar and she couldn't even get on to, an important enough podcast to make a difference. Couldn't even work that out because she was such a bad candidate and such a bad border czar. That whole thing, I mean, all you got to do is bring up, well, how'd that work out for you in the election? Not well, right? Not well.